Out over the black water, a single jet turns toward the ship. The ocean is invisible. The horizon is gone. All the pilot sees is a rectangle of light and a set of glowing needles that have to line up right now. On the flight deck, the cameras shake in the wind. Steam, exhaust, salt spray. People in colored jerseys blur past the lens, then vanish into darkness. And somewhere just off this chaos is a small, cramped room. In this room, nobody fires a weapon. Nobody launches a missile. Nobody even opens a window. Here, people talk into headsets and press a few switches. That's it. But if they get it wrong, everything you saw in the first episode stops working. The flying city becomes a very expensive problem, very fast. Tonight, this room will help launch and catch dozens of jets. Some in perfect weather, some in the kind of night where the sea and the sky look exactly the same. In this episode, you're going to see what a single day inside those tiny spaces really looks like. In our first episode, we walked through the carrier like a floating city. We saw the decks stacked like neighborhoods. We watched the ship breathe through a full day of work. Now we're zooming in to one of its smallest, tightest neighborhoods. Imagine slicing the ship open again. At the top, the flight deck, the loud rooftop airport you already know. Right under it, hidden in the steel, are pockets of light. Launch control for the catapults. Landing control and the rooms that tame the arresting gear. The spaces where people stare at pressure gauges, speed readouts, and green indicator lights while jets slam into the deck overhead. Most visitors never see these rooms. In many documentaries, the camera pans right past the doors. They're too small, too plain, too full of cables to look impressive. But these are the nerve nodes that turn the flight deck from a dangerous metal rectangle into a repeatable process. Each room is about the size of a garage. Each room holds enough responsibility to ruin a pilot's day in a single bad second. And the people inside are not action movie heroes. They're watchstanders who live by checklists and routine. From the outside, carrier aviation looks simple. A jet roars down the catapult, and sometime later, the same jet slams onto the wires. Launch. Recover. Repeat. But between launch and you're clear to land, an entire invisible network wakes up. In launch control, EMALS operators tune the power curve for each aircraft. They think in weight, wind, and target speed, not just in go and stop. Aviation boatswain's mates on deck talk to them by radio and by rhythm, calling out status in a language that sounds like code if you're not trained to hear it. Hours later, as the jet returns, a different room takes the lead. Arresting gear crews watch hydraulic pressures and cable positions. Landing controllers and LSOs track glide slope and angle of attack, trying to keep a tiny symbol on a screen and a real jet in the sky exactly where it needs to be. Most viewers only see the jet on final approach. They don't hear the quiet voices in headsets saying, "Power, hold it, little high, you're lined up, Roger, 3/4 mile." They don't see the hands that hover near emergency switches, ready to dump pressure or cut a cycle if something feels wrong. So if you've ever watched carrier footage and thought, that looks chaotic, but somehow it works, this is the somehow. Of course, most launches and landings are uneventful. That's the goal. On a good day, this job is almost boring. But the people in these rooms train as if every cycle could go wrong. A sensor flickers at the wrong moment. A pilot reports a system issue just before takeoff. A crosswind gust pushes a returning jet slightly off centerline. Inside these spaces, nobody raises their voice. They fall back on drilled phrases and muscle memory. Abort. Wave off. Reset. Run the checklist again. The pilot outside might remember it as a tense few seconds. For the team in here, it's Tuesday. Over the course of one day, they'll ride that line between routine and emergency again and again, sometimes without ever leaving a room the size of a living room. To understand how they hold that line for an entire shift, we can't stay on the outside of the door. We have to step through it. From above, the flight deck looks like the whole story. Jets, steam, exhaust, colored jerseys running in every direction like someone spilled a bag of Skittles on a slab of steel. Yellow shirts stand in front of aircraft, giving those famous hand signals. Green shirts crouch by the catapults and arresting gear, checking hoses and panels. Purple shirts push fuel hoses that look like fire hoses for jet engines. Red shirts move bombs and missiles with the calm of people who really can't afford a mistake. If you watched only this layer, you could believe the decisions happen right here, in the noise and the wind. You'd think that takeoff is just a director's show on the roof of a floating city, but the deck is only the surface of a system. Every launch you see begins with a quiet, ready in someone's headset deep inside the ship. Every safe landing ends with a small light changing color in a room that never sees daylight. The crew you're watching on top are the hands. The brains of the operation sit in spaces most visitors never even notice. These are the rooms this chapter is about. Rooms where the soundtrack isn't jet blast, but the soft hiss of ventilation and the click of switches. Rooms where the only view of the outside world is a row of tiny screens and numbers. From the deck, everything looks like controlled chaos. From here, it's closer to air traffic control in a steel shoebox. And the strange part is this. You could walk right past one of these doors and never realize that on the other side, somebody is about to decide if a 25-ton jet flies or waits. Let's pull back to that cutaway view of the carrier for a second. At the very top, you see the runway we already know, the flight deck. Near the bow, 2 long rectangles mark the catapults that throw jets into the air. At the stern, 4 cables stretch across the landing area, the arresting wires that have to catch those jets within a few meters. Now watch what happens when we trace those pieces downward. From the catapults, a line runs through the deck into a compartment just off the hangar level. This is launch control, the room that tells the catapult exactly how hard to push. Not full power or half power, but a precise curve, tuned to the weight and type of aircraft, the wind, and the speed of the ship. From the landing area, another line drops into the ship's spine. There, behind thick steel and hydraulic plumbing, sits arresting gear control, the team that sets how much resistance each cable will give when a jet slams onto it. Then, shift your eyes to the side of the deck. A small open platform hangs over the ocean, just after the landing area. That's the home of the LSOs landing signal officers, the voices you heard in the cold open, watching every approach with a mix of math and instinct. On the cutaway, these 3 points look like tiny dots on a diagram. In reality, they're cramped rooms and exposed platforms where dozens of small choices line up into a single yes or no, launch or hold, land or wave off. Each space is about the size of a garage or small living room. Each one is packed with panels, meters, circuit breakers, cables, and people trying not to bump elbows. When you stand on the deck, you see only the top of this diagram. When you follow the lines, you realize the airport on the roof is wired into a web of hidden control rooms that make it behave like a system instead of a stunt show. And just like any system, it only works because specific people own specific pieces of it. Inside these boxes of steel, the job titles sound almost ceremonial. On paper, they're just rates and billets. In practice, they're the difference between a clean cycle and a very long safety investigation. Start with the aviation boatswain's mates, usually just called ABs. They come in flavors. Some specialize in equipment, some in fuels, some in aircraft handling. On the deck, they're the ones you see hooking jets to the catapult, setting chains, moving tow bars, and managing the ballet of taxiing aircraft. Below decks, their world looks less glamorous and more mechanical. They live in valve rooms and pump rooms and spaces where pressure, temperature, and fluid levels matter as much as hand signals on the roof. If a catapult needs steam or an EMAL system needs cooling, somewhere an AB is making sure the system is fed and happy. Then there are the EMALS operators, the people behind the electromagnetic aircraft launch system. They stare at screens that show numbers most of us never think about: input power, launch energy, shuttle position. When a pilot sees a final go signal, it's because someone in this room has set a profile for that exact jet and confirmed that the system can deliver it. On the recovery side, you'll find the arresting gear crew. Their job is to make sure those 4 cables across the landing area behave like giant, well-trained shock absorbers. Too soft, and a jet might roll off the end. Too hard, and you put brutal stress on the aircraft and the pilot. So they tune hydraulic pressure, monitor drum rotation, and track how many times each wire has been used. And finally, the landing signal officers, or LSOs. Most of them are carrier pilots themselves. They stand on that small platform, watching each approach like a coach watching a crucial play. They talk the pilots down, grade the landings, and if something doesn't look right, they call wave off and send the jet around for another try. From the outside, it's easy to lump all of this into one word: the crew. Inside the ship, the roles are sharply divided. Each link in the chain has its own training, its own checklist, and its own small slice of responsibility that nobody else can quietly cover if they slip. In the next part of the episode, we'll follow a jet from briefing to launch and watch each of these roles switch on in real time. From the pilot's point of view, a catapult shot feels like controlled violence. You go from 0 to flying speed in about 2 seconds. Your body is slammed back into the seat. The ship disappears behind you in a blur of lights. From the deck, it looks like raw power, steam, or electromagnetic dust. Noise that punches straight through double hearing protection. A metal shuttle yanking a multi-million-dollar aircraft toward the edge of the world. But inside the launch and landing rooms, those same moments look quiet. A launch is a series of numbers lining up on a screen. Weight of the jet, wind over the deck, ship speed, target in speed. All of it feeds into a curve of energy that has to be just right, not too much, not too little. A landing is a graph of sink rate and angle, a cable tension profile, a set of hydraulic pressures that must spike and then settle within a tight tolerance. On the surface, you see a jet blast through the frame. In here, you see a light flip from amber to green. On the surface, it feels like luck that everything keeps working. In here, you see how little luck is allowed into the process. That's the real contrast of these tiny rooms. Outside, apparent chaos, huge forces, camera-ready drama. Inside, calm voices, small switches, people double-checking numbers in spaces no bigger than a garage. On the flight deck, it all looks like a well-rehearsed ritual. But in these rooms, there are people who simply don't get to have a bad day. Next, we're going to sit with the team that starts every cycle, the operators who tell a Ford-class carrier when it's safe to throw a jet into the sky. There's a moment before every launch when everything goes quiet for one person. Not on the deck up there, it's never quiet. Jets are howling, the ship is rolling, steam or heat shimmers in the air. But down here, in a room with no windows, the loudest sound is ventilation and the soft clicking of switches. If the flight deck is the stage, this room is the backstage equipment. We're in launch control. The walls are covered in panels and screens. Cables disappear into the ceiling and the floor. Labels run in neat rows. Power, pressure, temperature, status. There's just enough space between the chairs to squeeze past sideways. You won't find dramatic lighting here. No big red launch button like in a movie. The drama lives entirely in what the numbers say. On the deck above, a pilot is being hooked to the catapult. Yellow shirts guide the jet into position. Green shirts connect holdback bars and check panels along the track. From their point of view, the ship is a noisy open-air factory. In this room, it feels more like a data center. A line on a headset crackles. Weight, aircraft type, wind over deck, and operator types confirms. The system digests the information and quietly builds a plan. In a few seconds, that plan will decide how hard to throw a fully fueled jet off the front of the ship without letting it fall off the end. So how do you launch a 25-ton jet from a short strip of metal without guessing? On older carriers, catapults use steam-huge pistons pushed by compressed vapor. On a Ford-class ship, that job belongs to EMALS, the Electromagnetic Aircraft Launch System. Think of EMALS as a rail that can create a controlled magnetic shove. Instead of one big push, it delivers a carefully shaped wave of force along the track. On the surface, you see only the shuttle, the metal block that pulls the jet racing forward and vanishing at the bow. What you don't see is the math that happens first. The system starts with a few simple facts. How heavy is this aircraft today? How much fuel and ordnance is on board? What's the wind doing across the deck? How fast is the ship itself moving through the water? All of that feeds into a single goal: end speed. The jet needs to leave the bow going fast enough for its wings to produce lift. Too slow, and it drops toward the ocean. Too fast, and you slam its structure with forces it doesn't need. The holdback bar, a metal link at the tail, keeps the jet locked in place while the engines spool up. It's like a starting block for a sprinter, except the sprinter is a fighter jet and the track is made of steel. When the engines are ready, the pilot salutes or signals. On deck, crew members step clear. In launch control, an operator sees the weight, the wind, the selected launch profile, and watches a set of numbers settle into the right range. Only when every piece matches does the system arm the shot. From the outside, the launch looks like raw power. From here, it's a moving graph, a curve of energy that climbs, peaks, and ends exactly where it's supposed to. And that curve has to be right on the first try, every time. Inside launch control, jobs are divided as cleanly as the panels on the wall. At the center are the EMALS operators. They're the ones who watch the launch profiles, arm the system, and start each shot. They speak in checklists. Weight confirmed. Profile loaded. System ready. To one side, you might find a supervisor, the person who carries the responsibility for the whole sequence. They're the extra set of eyes, the one who has to say no when everything inside them wants to say yes, launch, keep the schedule alive. Their world is made of limits. Maximum temperature, minimum power, safe ranges. As long as the numbers live inside the box, the operation continues. If a number steps outside, the answer is simple: stop. On the other end of the circuit are the aviation boatswain's mates on deck. They're the link between machines and metal. An AB checks the catapult track, makes sure the shuttle is where it should be, confirms the holdback bar is seated, and verifies that nobody and nothing is where it shouldn't be. Their call over the intercom isn't dramatic. It's almost boring on purpose. Cat 1. Ready. Shooter up. Deck clear. In launch control, that call joins a stack of other confirmations. System ready. Deck ready. Pilot ready. Sometimes there's a pause, a human moment where everyone silently rechecks what they already know. There is no countdown for the audience here. Just a quiet breath before somebody says, Cat 1, launching, now. For the operator, that's a press of a button or the movement of a control handle. For the pilot, it's the most violent 2 seconds of their day. And for the city around them, it's one more successful conversion of electricity, steel, and human attention into controlled speed. In the next segment, we're going to slow that process down even more and walk through a single launch from briefing room to bow. Every launch starts far away from the catapult. In a small briefing room, a group of pilots sits in front of a screen. Weather, mission, fuel loads, ordnance, all the boring. Necessary ingredients go on the board. Nobody here is thinking about the exact pressure in a hydraulic line or the temperature of a motor coil. They're thinking about the target, the route, the fuel plan. But on a carrier, every decision piles weight onto the jet. More fuel, more bombs, more pods. Somewhere in the ship's network, that weight is already being updated in a database that launch control will use. Later, as the pilot walks to the jet, another chain of events begins. On deck, aviation boatswain's mates move the aircraft into position on the catapult track. Chocks out. Tow bar off. The nose wheel drops into the shuttle. The holdback bar locks into the rear. Inside launch control, a headset crackles. Cat 2, Hornet, 35,000 pounds. The operator types. The system pulls up the right family of launch profiles for that type of aircraft. Engines spool up. On deck, you see heat rippling behind the jet. In here, you see engine readings and power availability. Cat 2, shooter, ready. Launch control, ready. Pilot, ready. There's a heartbeat, the human lag between we can and we will. The operator verifies the last few numbers. Ship speed, wind over deck, target end speed. The launch profile bar glows armed. Finger on the control. On the outside, the pilot signals and braces. Inside, the operator moves the control, and the system releases energy along the track. For one long breath, the shuttle accelerates, dragging the jet with it. The numbers climb. 60, 80, 100. At the bow, the shuttle drops away, and the aircraft is suddenly alone, wings catching air that wasn't there a second ago. The pilot feels it as a violent shove, and then the strange lightness of flight. Launch control feels it as a clean trace on a screen and a set of numbers that end inside the safe box. Another shot, another jet airborne. And somewhere in the same ship, someone is already prepping the next profile. But launches don't always go exactly like this, and that's where the real test of this room begins. Most days, the system hums along. Launch after launch, numbers stay inside the lines. But the reason launch control exists isn't just to send jets. It's to refuse them when something feels wrong. Maybe a sensor reading jumps at the last second. A motor is hotter than it should be. Power isn't ramping exactly the way the curve expects. To a casual eye, the jet on deck looks fine. Engines are up, pilot is ready, schedule is tight. On the deck, people are expecting the familiar slam of another takeoff. Inside, someone presses a different switch. Cat 2, abort launch, stand by. On deck, the crew signals the pilot to idle down. The holdback bar doesn't release. The shuttle doesn't move. From the outside, it's a minor delay, a little confusion, maybe a wave of frustration. From the operator's chair, it's a victory. The system did exactly what it was supposed to do. It chose caution over momentum. To keep that instinct sharp, crews drill for the bad days. They run scenarios where numbers drift slowly out of limits, where comms lag, where a launch must be stopped at the last possible moment. They practice these failures so often that when the real one arrives, it feels like another rep of the same exercise. Launching jets from a moving ship will never be truly routine. But in these rooms, the culture is built on making it feel as routine as possible, even when saying no means pushing back against all the noise and urgency above. Getting a jet safely off the deck is hard. Catching it again on a runway the size of a supermarket on a ship that's pitching in the dark is even harder. In the next chapter, we'll move to the other end of the cycle into the rooms and platforms that reach out and grab those same jets when they come home. There is one place on the ship where someone watches every single landing with the same quiet question. Is this one going to work? We've already seen the launch rooms that throw jets into the sky. Now we've come to the other end of the loop, to the tiny balcony where people talk pilots back onto the ship. This is the LSO platform, a metal ledge hanging off the side of the flight deck, just aft of the landing area. There's no glass, no climate control, just a railing, a few consoles, a telephone, and a group of aviators in helmets and float coats staring into the wind. They're called landing signal officers, or LSOs. Most of them are carrier pilots themselves. They know exactly how it feels to look at a dark ocean, a small rectangle of lights, and hope you're lined up with the right piece of that moving runway. From here, they can see three things the pilot must juggle at once. The real horizon, rising and falling as the ship pitches in the swell, the deck lights and runway center line sliding under the nose of the jet, and the glow of the meatball, the optical landing system, a bright light that moves up and down compared to a row of reference lights. To land correctly, the pilot needs to keep the ball centered to hold that glowing dot in the sweet spot, neither high nor low. Too high, and you risk touching down late or missing the wires. too low, and you flirt with the ramp. The LSOs watch this dance like coaches watching a crucial play. They have radios tied directly into the pilot's helmet. Their job is to say out loud what the pilot most needs to hear in the most stressful 10 seconds of the flight. Power, easy with it. Little low, you're lined up, hold it there. If something doesn't look right, if the ball drops too far, if the jet is drifting, if the picture feels wrong, they have one more word: wave off. It's not drama. It's a reset button that trades a messy, dangerous landing for one more try. And while all eyes are on the jet and the ball, there's another team waiting below the deck, preparing for the exact moment rubber meets steel. If the LSO platform is the face of carrier landings, the real muscles are hidden a deck or two below. Follow the landing area down through the steel, and you find a narrow, hot room lined with massive drums and thick cables. This is arresting gear control, the space that turns a screaming jet into a taxiing aircraft in just a few ship lengths. Across the landing area topside, 4 steel cables stretch from one side of the deck to the other. They're called arresting wires. When a jet lands, a tailhook hanging under its tail is supposed to grab one of these wires. The pilots aim for a target wire, usually not the first or the last, but one in the middle that gives them a margin both ways. But down here, the team doesn't care which cable the hook grabs, as long as the system does what it was set up to do: stop the aircraft in time without breaking it. Each wire runs down through the deck and wraps around a huge drum connected to a complex braking system. On older carriers, that braking is mostly hydraulic thick fluid forced through valves to absorb energy. On newer systems like the advanced arresting gear, there's more electronics in the loop, more precise control over how that energy is spread out. To the landing crew, this room is all about force management. Before a recovery cycle, they set the system for the expected landing weight and speed of the aircraft type coming in. Heavier jet, more energy to absorb. Lighter load, adjust the braking so you don't jerk the aircraft to a stop like a car hitting a wall. The watchstanders here, the arresting gear crew, stare at gauges and digital readouts that show cable tension, drum speed, hydraulic pressure, and system status. They have their own version of the ball, numbers that must stay inside a safe box while the chaos happens upstairs. When a jet's tailhook snags a wire, these drums spin up in a fraction of a second. All the kinetic energy of tens of thousands of pounds of aircraft moving at approach speed has to go somewhere. This room is where it goes. If the system is set right, the jet rolls to a firm but survivable stop in just a few dozen meters. If it's not, the consequences play out very fast, in metal and momentum. That's why, while the LSOs are talking pilots down, this crew is quietly tweaking the resistors in the system, literally deciding how hard the ship will pull back when the hook bites. And when we follow a single landing all the way through, you'll see how these two worlds mesh into one moment of truth. Let's ride along on a single landing. Somewhere off the bow, a jet turns inbound. Fuel is lower now. The pilot's world has shrunk to a few key instruments and a patch of light on the ocean where the ship should be. From the cockpit, you see the meatball and the centerline lights. You're trying to keep the ball in the middle, wings level, nose neither too high nor too low. The carrier's wake stretches behind like a chalk line you can't quite focus on. On the LSO platform, the picture is bigger. The LSOs see the jet's angle against the horizon, its alignment with the deck, the way its nose moves when the pilot adds or pulls power. They're listening to the tone of the engines, watching the ball shift. On speed, little right, come left, power. Their calls sound simple, almost casual, but every word is chosen to be short, clear, and impossible to misunderstand. Below the deck, in arresting gear control, the landing is just beginning. The crew knows what type of jet is coming and roughly how heavy it is. Their dials and screens are already set for that profile. They see the system armed, the selected engine settings for the braking system, the status of each wire, wire 1 set, wire 2 set, 3 and 4 set. On the flight deck, sailors in colored jerseys clear the landing area. They step behind the foul line's painted boundaries that mark where it's safe to stand. The deck becomes a narrow, sacred lane reserved for 1 jet and 4 wires. The last seconds happen fast. From the cockpit, the ball wobbles but stays close to center. The runway expands in the windscreen, and then there's a hard thump as the wheels hit. From the LSO platform, the hook sparks as it skips over the first cable, then catches the second, the target wire, and yanks tight. From the arresting gear room, the drum for wire 2 explodes into motion, pressure spikes into the expected zone, and then bleeds off as the jet decelerates. In the cockpit, your harness bites into your shoulders. On deck, the aircraft jerks forward, then settles and rolls back a bit as the cable retracts. Down below, the tension trace lands neatly inside the safe box. That was a good landing. Not perfect, maybe, but safe, controlled, and thoroughly uninteresting to the people who live here, which is exactly how they like it. Sometimes, though, the jet doesn't catch a wire at all. And that's when another set of procedures and another vocabulary word takes over. On a carrier, mistake is a dangerous word. So they use different ones. A wave-off is what happens when the LSOs decide a landing isn't shaping up safely. Maybe the jet is too low. Maybe it's drifting sideways. Maybe the ball suddenly drops out of the sweet spot. From the platform, the call is simple: wave off, wave off. In the cockpit, that means full power. Climb away, try again. On deck, the crew stays clear. In the arresting gear room, nothing moves. The wires stay slack. The drums stay still. The landing that might have been a problem just doesn't happen. A bolter is different. That's when the pilot flies the right path, touches down, and the hook skips over all the wires. No catch, no stop. From the pilot's seat, it feels like you've slammed down. Then suddenly you're flying again. It's jarring and frustrating, but it's not a crash. It's a planned escape route. Jets are designed to bolt. Pilots land with enough power that if they miss a cable, they can climb away. The LSOs watch it, grade it, and send the pilot back around the pattern. Below deck, the arresting gear crew checks the system, resets their indicators, and treats it as data, not drama. Daytime in clear weather, this dance is intense but manageable. At night, or in bad weather, the pressure multiplies. The horizon disappears. All the pilot sees is a moving box of lights and the shifting glow of the ball. The ship might be pitching, yawing, rolling 3 motions at once, all under the jet's nose. For the LSOs, that means more conservative calls, earlier wave-offs, stricter limits on what good enough looks like. For the arresting gear team, it means double-checking setups, building extra margin into their settings, watching for any sign the system is drifting out of tune. And sometimes, even with all of that, a landing arrives that hits harder than expected. Maybe the jet is heavier than planned. Maybe a gust of wind adds just a little extra speed. The hook catches the wire, the nose slams down, and for a second, every graph in the arresting gear room spikes higher than anyone likes. But the wire holds. The drums do their job. The aircraft stops where it should. Up top, it looks like a firm landing. Down here, it looks like a test, the system, and the people passed. They don't wait for real emergencies to figure this out. Crews drill what-if scenarios over and over. Cables parting, engines surging, sensors lying, pilots having to bolter multiple times in a row. They rehearse failures so that when the real thing comes, their response barely looks different from a normal day at work. Handling one landing like this is impressive. These teams do it dozens of times a day, in all weather, for weeks at sea. In the next chapter, we'll stretch the timeline and watch how an entire day of launches and recoveries feels from inside these tiny rooms and platforms when the clock doesn't stop just because one jet made it home. On a carrier, your day doesn't start when the sun comes up. It starts when someone else's day ends. For the launch and recovery teams, time is chopped into watches and flight windows, not mornings and evenings. Breakfast might happen in the middle of the night. Good morning might be said with a red glow from night lighting instead of sunlight. We've already seen how these tiny rooms launch jets and catch them. Now we're going to live one full day with the people inside. In a berthing compartment below the waterline, an alarm buzzes in the dark. Metal racks. Curtains. The smell of detergent, jet fuel, and too many boots and too little space. A hand sneaks out from behind a curtain, silencing the alarm before it wakes the whole row. A junior EMALS operator slides out of the top rack, careful not to step on the sailor below. He pulls on a t-shirt with his rate on the chest, socks, boots, then grabs his cranial, that padded helmet that marks him as part of the flight deck tribe. In another compartment, one deck over, a petty officer from the arresting gear crew ties his boots and checks his watch. He's been doing this long enough to know roughly how the day will feel just by the schedule taped to the bulkhead. On it, a simple plan. First launch window, mid-morning. First big recovery, early afternoon. Night traps, just before midnight. In a cramped office near the Air Department spaces, the division's leading chief runs through the plan. He points at a whiteboard cluttered with times and squadron codes. 2 big cycles before sunset. Weather's decent, but crosswinds picking up. One cat is down for maintenance this afternoon, so we're a little tighter on launches. Couple of jets coming back heavy. We'll watch the numbers on those. Outside, the ocean looks flat and harmless. Inside these rooms, people are already thinking about how that same water will move the ship later, and how that motion will make a 25-ton jet feel on a 100-and-something meter strip of steel. By the time most of the ship is just finishing breakfast, this team already has a day in their head, a map of launches and landings that they'll try to make real without a single surprise. The sun hasn't even hit the deck yet, but the clock on this shift has already started. Late morning, the ship is fully woken up. The galley is running on repeat, feeding waves of people who never all eat at once. The hangar hums with last-minute checks. On the roof, the colored jerseys are already moving jets into position. For the launch control and arresting gear teams, this is when the day gets loud even if their rooms stay physically quiet. In launch control, the EMALS operators slide into their seats. They've done the pre-flight checks, verified power, cooling, backup systems. Now the screens in front of them begin to populate with real data. Aircraft types, expected weights, wind over deck, ship speed, The first pilot taxis into position on Cat 1. On the deck, it's all hand signals and body language. Thumbs up, big sweeping gestures. The kind of communication that works even in a hurricane of noise. Down here, it's headsets and numbers. Cat 1, Super Hornet 34,000, end quote. That's about this present in present piece. Profile loaded, power available, system ready. The operator's finger hovers near the control. On another console, the supervisor watches not just one catapult, but the whole pattern. How many aircraft in the cycle, how tight the timing will be when they all come back, what that means for fuel and fatigue. Launch. The jet slams forward and disappears off the bow. Before anyone has time to savor the moment, the system is cycling for the next aircraft. And the next. And the next. On the recovery side, the arresting gear room is in a different rhythm. For now, they're setting up. They know what's launching, so they know roughly what will be landing a few hours later. Weight tables, approach speeds, preferred target wires. They dial in the braking settings for the first recovery window, choosing how much force the system will use to catch those jets when they come home loaded with whatever they couldn't drop or fire. Topside, on the LSO platform, there's more watching than talking at this hour. They track practice passes, touch and goes, the feel of the wind over the deck. They're not just grading pilots, they're grading the ship. How it's moving, how the ball is dancing, how the sea is setting the terms for tonight. Inside all these spaces, the day stretches ahead like a checklist. Launch, recover, reset, repeat. But the human brain doesn't run at catapult speed all day. So between launches and traps, the tempo shifts back and forth from high focus to small, ordinary moments that keep people sane. A joke at the console, a sip of coffee gone lukewarm, a glance at a photo taped beside a screen. The contrast is what makes this work. If you try to stay at maximum intensity all day, the system breaks. If you relax at the wrong second, someone gets hurt. And somewhere between those 2 points, this shift has to live. No day at sea goes exactly to plan. By mid-afternoon, the shift has settled into a groove. The first recovery has gone well. Jets are turning around in the hangar, crews are refueling and rearming, and the next launch window is lining up on the schedule. Inside launch control, it almost feels smooth. Another aircraft rolls into position. The operator loads the profile, confirms the numbers, watches the system, status bars settle. On deck, the ABs finish their checks. Cat 2 ready, deck clear. In the headset, one more detail arrives. Jet is a little heavier than the last one, full tanks, full load. The operator adjusts the profile, eyes flicking to the in-speed requirement. All green. Launch control ready, pilot ready, finger on the control. And then, just before the motion, one small thing shifts. A power readout lags half a second behind where it usually is. A temperature is creeping up toward a limit line. The difference is tiny, the kind of thing no camera on the deck would ever catch. But the people in this room have seen thousands of launches. Their job is not to trust that everything will be fine. Their job is to trust the habit of checking twice. Stand by. Cat 2, hold. On the deck, the shooter lowers his hand. The jet's engines stay at power, but nothing moves. For the pilot, it's a confusing pause. And here, it's a decision point. The operator and supervisor run through a short checklist. Is the reading real or a glitch? Is the system drifting or just catching up? Is there any doubt at all? They've drilled this. In a simulator? On previous cruises? In long, slightly boring sessions where nothing explodes and nobody cheers. Abort launch, power idle, reset profile. On deck, the signal changes. The pilot pulls power back. Crew step in, check the gear again. It looks like a minor delay. In the room, it feels like exactly what they're paid to do. Say no when the safest answer is no. A few minutes later, after a reset and a recheck, the launch goes ahead. Most of the ship never hears about the glitch. It's just a line in a log and a quiet story told over coffee later. The system fell off, so we reset it. And that's the pattern. Thousands of perfectly normal moments, interrupted by a handful of small decisions that keep the big disasters theoretical. Night is still ahead. The hardest landings of the day haven't even started. By the time darkness pools around the ship, the day has left its mark. Faces on the LSO platform are a little more lined. Voices in the launch and landing rooms are a little more hoarse. The coffee is weaker. The humor is, somehow, better. Night traps, night landings are the part of the day nobody ever entirely relaxes about. The horizon is gone. Clouds erase stars. The only thing the pilot sees is a moving box of lights and the shifting glow of the ball. For the LSOs, this is when their job feels least like coaching and most like defense. They tighten their grading. They wave off sooner if the picture looks wrong. Little low. Power. Power. Wave off. Wave off. They know that every extra ounce of caution costs fuel and time. They also know what happens if you wait too long. Below deck, the arresting gear team has adjusted their setups for the night profile. More margin, More conservative settings. They're watching for small changes. A wire that's starting to wear, a pressure trace that takes a hair too long to settle. The last recovery of the day builds like a slow drumbeat. Jet after jet comes down the chute. Some landings are smooth, the kind pilots will brag about in the ready room. Others hit harder, scraping into the "we're not talking about that one" category. One of them arrives heavier than planned, with a minor system issue that forced it to stay out longer. From the cockpit, it feels like any other night approach. Line up the ball, trust the LSOs, trust the ship. From the platform, someone mutters, "He's heavy, keep him honest." Calls get a little sharper. On speed, don't chase it, power, power. The hook hits, the wire grabs, and for a split second, every needle in the arresting gear room jumps. Pressure, tension, drum speed, all higher than ideal, all still inside the red line. Then the jet rolls to a stop. There's a quick exhale in 3 places at once. Cockpit, LSO platform, and the hot, crowded room full of drums and pipes. Outside, the ship keeps moving. Inside, the shift begins to wind down. Logs are updated. Systems are set for standby or for the next crew. Someone wipes sweat off a console that hasn't moved all day. In a quiet moment, long after the last landing, one of the watchstanders puts it in simple words, the kind of thought that someone might share later as a voiceover. "We don't get hero moments down here. If we do our jobs right, nobody remembers our names." It's not about trusting luck. It's about trusting procedures and trusting each other to follow them, even when we're tired. These people rarely make it into glossy recruiting videos. You almost never see them in the highlight reels. But without them, a carrier is just a very large, very expensive parking lot. So what gives them the confidence that tomorrow, after another sleepless sea night and another set of hard landings, the system still won't fall apart? To answer that, we have to step back from this one shift and look at the culture, the training, and the hidden safety nets that keep the entire launch and recovery machine honest. That's where we're heading next. At the start of this season, we called a Ford-class carrier a floating city wrapped around an airport. In this episode, we've been living inside its intersections. These launch and landing rooms are the carrier's traffic lights. They don't look like much: a balcony in the wind, a box of drums below deck, a control room with no windows. But every green and red signal here carries the weight of a human life and a multi-million-dollar aircraft. Up on the flight deck, the city shows you its fireworks: catapults firing, jets slamming onto cables, exhaust and steam boiling into the air. Down here, you've seen the other half of the truth. Quiet voices, fingers resting on guarded switches, people who spend their whole day making sure nothing exciting happens. In episode 1, we walk the city end to end. Tonight, you've stood in the rooms that decide how that city moves. And to understand what that really means, you have to look past the machines and back at the people inside them. An EMALS operator in his 20s who grew up around video games and spreadsheets, now shaping invisible curves of power that decide if a jet flies or falls. An arresting gear technician who can look at a tension graph and tell you by feel whether a landing was light, firm, or we'll talk about that one later. An LSO who is already trapped on this deck, now standing on the platform telling other pilots what they most need to hear when the ship looks very small and the ocean looks very big. An aviation boatswain's mate whose knees hurt from steel decks, whose hands smell like fuel and grease, and who still checks the same pins and fittings the same way every single time. They're different ages. They came from different towns. Some are natural thrill seekers. Some are quiet introverts who would rather live behind a console than in front of a camera. But they all share one strange goal. The perfect day at work is the one nobody remembers. No blown launches. No blown tires. No broken jets. No, there we were, stories worth telling. Just clean profiles, clean traces, clean grades in a logbook, and the quiet satisfaction of walking back to berthing, knowing the highlight reel belongs to someone else. The carrier's power isn't just steel, or reactors, or radar. It's this culture. Thousands of people, in hundreds of rooms, all aiming for nothing went wrong on a ship built to live at the edge of what can go wrong. And tomorrow, they'll get up and aim for the same boring miracle all over again. If you freeze the carrier in your mind right now, you can see the whole loop we've traced. A jet roars off the bow, supported by numbers in a windowless room. Hours later, it claws its way back onto a strip of steel, caught by cables that dive into a space full of drums and oil and watchstanders. Between those two moments, an entire floating city has been working underneath, feeding people, pumping fuel, routing power, holding course, watching the sky. Launch and recovery are the heartbeat you can see. But for most of its life, the air wing doesn't live on the roof. It lives under it. When the engines wind down and the wings fold, the jets disappear into the hangar deck, a cavern of metal where this flying neighborhood sleeps, breaks, and gets rebuilt for the next call. In the next episode, we're going to follow them down there. We'll step into the world of tugs and tow bars, folded wings, and stacked spare parts, the place where the carrier parks an Air Force at sea and keeps it alive between launches. Until then, keep that cutaway of the ship in your head. Because whether you're looking at the tiniest control room or the biggest open space on board, it's all the same story. A moving city, a narrow runway on its roof, and thousands of people making sure that when a jet comes home, there's always a place to land.